lot of the human element to lobbying and just government relations advocacy is so important because it's that human element where you can really say, here's how this is affecting me. Here's how the unintended consequences are. And I think when you don't have all the facts from what the legislation could potentially do, you don't even have the time to go and lobby against something. You don't have the time to go advocate on behalf of something.
Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government, and the future. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do.
Welcome back to AI Government in the Future. I'm your host, Max Romanik. Today, I'm excited to welcome Laura Carr and Eric Davis to the show. Laura is the co-founder of USLege, a forward-thinking company dedicated to shaping the future of politics through AI. With an impressive background that includes serving as policy director in the Texas Senate, government relations director and scheduler to Governor Greg Abbott, Laura has a wealth of experience in the intersection of politics, technology, and advocacy. Her work has spanned both the public and private sectors, focusing on how AI and emerging technologies can transform political lobbying and advocacy. Joining her is Eric Davis, the CEO of USLege.ai, where he leads efforts to integrate AI into Texas politics, aiming to enhance governance and the electoral process through cutting-edge technology. Eric has spent over 2 decades developing programs and policies that protect both consumers and platforms, and he is a key voice in the discussion about how AI will impact elections and political frameworks. Today, we'll be diving into how AI is transforming political advocacy, the opportunities it brings, and the risks we need to be mindful of, especially in maintaining democratic integrity. We'll also explore how government insight, regulation, and collaboration play a crucial role in these developments. Welcome to the show, Eric and Laura.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Excellent. So as a means of getting us started, I would love if both of you could share a little bit of your backstory on how the intersection of politics and technology became a focus for you.
Yes, I can definitely kind of kick that off as a person who was in politics for 12 years and all different facets, from in the building to on the outside, lobbying, fundraising, doing a little bit of everything. I think it was the frustration that came from just the 2 really big problems I was seeing in the field. So getting accessibility to all these committee hearings, floor debates, agency meetings that are happening all the time that it's impossible to be at all of, and just trying to get access to see what really happens. And then the other big piece was just the sheer number of legislation, whether that at the federal level or at the state level. Here in Texas, we actually file just as much as the federal level, which is astronomical. And we only have a 6-month session to do it. So really, it came out of frustration where there's really nothing tracking what was going on and no transparency into some of these really large bills and complex legislation. So kind of came out of frustration there, and AI made a lot of things possible that were previously impossible. So was very excited when we started building USLege.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Eric, how about you?
Yeah, on my end, I wish I could say I had the political pedigree that Laura has, but I absolutely do not. I am a political outsider. So for me to be running the company is an exciting new opportunity for me. All my experience is in the startup game. So I've brought this is my 4th company that I've brought from 0 to 1. I've been through acquisitions. I've been through, most of the growing pains that you can think of at early company stage. So Laura and I know each other very, very well. We're actually married. And I'm a very firm believer that the best businesses that I've been a part of solve the number 1 and 2 issues that, any group of people or industry is facing. So, Laura would come home and say, be pulling her hair out and say, I just had to spend, consolidate or summarize 500 bills in a day and give a recommendation for how somebody's supposed to vote for them. And knowing how AI works, we started talking about it. She started using ChatGPT, became a superhero in her office, and then said, okay, there's got to be something. And then we started doing interviews, started interviewing as many lobbyists as we can speak with, as many of those who worked in the building, political professionals. And we interviewed everyone from students to professors to news organizations to agencies, offices, lobbyists, everything. And, we came to the conclusion that there was some problems that we can solve. And I'm an opportunist at heart. And when I hear that there's problems that we can solve, and that's generally what I'll jump on. So that's why I'm here.
That's a great origin story. Love that it also includes a meet cute. My wife and I were the same way. We met at work. We've been working alongside each other now for years. So definitely having a little bit of an affinity for you guys with that. That's great.
I love that. It's fun. I like to share.
Absolutely. So first question here then, traditionally, I think a lot of people see it rightly or wrongly as being driven by personal relationships and a lot of insider knowledge. How do you envision AI transforming that space and that practice?
I think a lot of the human element to lobbying and just government relations advocacy is so important because it's that human element where you can really say, here's how this is affecting me. Here's how the unintended consequences are. And I think when you don't have all the facts from what the legislation could potentially do, you don't even have the time to go and lobby against something. You don't have the time to go advocate on behalf of something. So I really see like government relations and lobbyists as educators who educate, lawmakers on specific nuanced areas. And then advocates will come in and be able to actually voice what's going on. So I think our platform is going to be really a game changer starting here in Texas with showing people what's actually going on in bills. AI is an amazing tool to be able to show the changes immediately. And the best example I had of that was last session. We had a bill that looked good. I knew everything about it. And then an hour before the hearing, there was a committee substitute. The bill completely changed. And everybody who was there to testify didn't know what to testify on anymore because the bill had changed so much and they didn't have time to read it. So one of the really good pieces with AI is going to be, I think, just increasing that element of knowledge, giving you the education, giving you the background on something quicker than you could have done manually, and then really use your interpersonal skills to voice your concerns and to potentially make change.
Yeah, I'd love to dig in on that sort of notion of collaboration a little bit. I mean, if AI is going to be this transformative tool bringing transparency and greater access to information, do you see new opportunities for collaboration between policymakers and lobbyists? It sounds like the democratization of information, if you will, could just open some doors that currently are either slightly ajar or we don't even know they're there.
I think so. We're working with a lot of different partners in government and outside of government. And I think there's a lot of stakeholders in these things, right? We've pulled all the witness data from last session, and there were 12,000 people who testified in the House and Senate here in Texas. So those people are all civically engaged. And I think having better knowledge and access to kind of a system where the legislator and the witness can really understand each other, we're just giving more access to that information. So I definitely think it's going to be an overall good.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense in the committee hearing process. Do you think that it also has similar effects sort of for the behind the scenes kind of advocacy that, is the nuts and bolts of how those bills get constructed in the first place?
Absolutely. I think this is going to be extremely helpful for those outside the building who want to potentially with bill drafting, right? Like, here's some ideas. Here's how we can start drafting bills that will help in this way. And also, if a bill gets filed that is detrimental to a certain group, I think they'll be able to just have more time to actually draft some alternative legislation and language and things like that.
Yeah.
And I have a story here, actually. What AI does a really good job with is digesting massive amounts of information, right? And, one of the big changes that we've really seen is customization at scale, right? So the things that one group cares about is not the same thing that another group cares about. And, in the past, we would have had to reach back out or had to reach to my engineering team, say, hey, here's what they're looking for. 6 months later, maybe they get something, the customer gets something that they really want, right? But now with large language models, we can actually say, hey, here's the type of stuff that this person is interested in. And then we'll be able to cater that information. So one story that I have is we were talking with a partner. I won't name who the partner is, but they said, hey, I had a friend who was a chairman of a committee, right? And my bill came up and I knew that my bill was ironclad. We were all good to go. Somebody came in real sneaky and then snuck something as a rider in a little bit later. And they had no idea. But luckily, their friend was a chairman and said, hey, your bill is up. This happened and you're not going to like this. Sent them a text. They showed up. And then we're able to kind of solve the issue with, artificial intelligence and digesting that massive amount of information. That can be a text message to their phone that says, hey, this is a threat right now. Someone tried to sneak something into your bill as a rider or a committee substitute or whatever, and it's trying to, hit you in a way that you don't want to be hit right here. So Those types of things and the digesting of that information in a way that's custom to each individual user, I think is a pretty significant opportunity to, collaboration is one way to put it, but also there's a lot of people on other sides of it. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit contentious, right? And giving better tools to really win your side is really what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's a great example. Absolutely. It does draw out a question for me. Can you talk a little bit about, at least at a high level, some of the technical elements required to actually integrate AI into political practice?
Sure. Yeah, there's really two sides of what we're doing, right? One of them is what information are we intaking? What are the sources of information? So right now, there's nowhere online that we really know of where every committee, we're in Texas right now specifically, we're focused in Texas, and then we'll be expanding out where all Texas committee hearings are transcribed, right? So we take that information and then digest it and then cross-reference that information with the second component of what we're doing, which is how we're displaying that information, right? So think of, there's bills as well. We get bills and then transcripts that come through and get cross-referenced with each individual user's profile. Let's say that I'm a lobbyist who lobbies on behalf of automotive dealerships, right? And then it'll cater all the outputs to the things that I actually care about to say, hey, your bill moved here. Someone tried to slip something into a bill a little bit later that you're going to want to know. This many bills came up that you really don't like, right? So what we try to do is really be the AI assistant and really have the backs of all of our partners, make sure that their interests are actually being, as closely followed as they can, but, we're as agnostic as possible, right? We have customers on both sides of everything. So we have to make sure there's also a ironclad, walled garden is what we internally call it, to make sure there's no bleeding over from one customer to another customer, because that can cause massive, massive issues. We would be out of there pretty quickly if we did do that.
Yeah, no, that makes a bunch of sense. Clearly, the government has a role as sort of a data broker for your systems. But I'm curious if you sort of could envision an ideal world. Is there a regulatory function that they would need to play as well, sort of given the guardrails for where a service like what you guys do operates?
So I'm a little bit hesitant to talk about the specific regulation that would be needed. I'm not a lawyer, right? But I do know some of the threats that they would run into, right? For instance, we could tell a story that a lot of your listeners probably might understand, already know about, right? But we have a partner who has a gin distillery on the side, and he submitted a picture of his gin bottle for like an advertisement. He's like, write me a cartoon that's an advertisement for me, right? He submitted it to ChatGPT. 3 days later, he got tagged in something that had his gin bottle and someone else holding it that was created by ChatGPT. The Texas state government and state governments do not want to be that gin bottle. They do not want their data to be training the entire overarching model so that everybody knows like how they're interacting, they know attitudes, all the above, right? So what we do and what we believe is the best practice here is to have that individualized approach, right? Anything that they submit is not going to be training the overarching model. Is there a regulatory hurdle around there and a certain technology that those in the building, if you will, are allowed to use or not allowed to use? I'm not sure. I just know that it's a big thing when we're talking with these government agencies. It's a pretty important piece for them.
We do know all the staffers, Capitol Hill, across the country are using new tech. They want to use it. And so a lot of our future partners that are in government, actually in the building, are just excited for a new way to use it that's safe and secure, because they know that they're using ChatGPT. And when they find out potentially some of the pitfalls of putting in some of their more proprietary information, then it can be worrying. But people want to use AI. They want to be, utilize the technology. It's amazing capabilities. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a question I like to ask all of our guests, because one of the themes that we have running throughout is that sort of tension between innovation and regulation. Regulation almost always is going to slow down innovation. And for ethical considerations, that sort of stuff, maybe that's a net positive. But generally speaking, how do you strike that balance? And so I like it for people to sort of give their perspective on that. And then, to your point, the tools are out there, they're going to be used. And it's basically impossible for the regulatory frameworks to keep up. There's not really going to be any sort of like real-time regulation on that. And any attempts that we've ever done so in our history tend to squash innovation, and it's a total disaster. So you have to run a little bit of risk letting the technology get out ahead of you. identify the patterns of behavior that might present a concern and then come up with some sort of creative solution to it. Anything else that gets it backwards, you tend to not have the topic of conversation any longer because the regulation squashes it into non-existence almost overnight.
Absolutely. And luckily, we have some fantastic partners. An investor of ours is the Texas Association of Business, which is essentially the Chamber of Commerce of Texas. Very, very pro-business. We're thrilled to be working with them. And then also they have an IT caucus that's run by Senator Tan Parker and Chairman and Rep Giovanni Capriglione. And they are absolutely fantastic partners. They absolutely, all of them are really leading the way. They understand the opportunity for Texas specifically to lead the United States and the world in artificial intelligence innovation. And, there's reasonable regulation that I think most can get behind, but they're also have a very clear understanding that they're not trying to stifle innovation as well.
Yeah. It's a very tough balancing act to do. And I applaud anybody who is stepping out on that game field transparently, because you're a hero and a villain and almost no space in between. So related to that, I think that at least in the DC Beltway, there's a growing belief that AI really has a potential to sort of democratize lobbying, leveling the playing field for some of the smaller advocacy groups that historically have not been as well resourced. Accepting that that hypothetical might be true, do you think that A, that's correct, and B, is there a risk that AI could actually consolidate power instead of making it more democratized and accessible?
I definitely think it's going to make it more accessible and it will be an overall good for most people. So we've got, lobbyists who are saying, I'm not worried about AI at all because I know how to use it. And it's as good as the prompt you give it. So I think a lot of our top lobbyists in Texas that are our partners using this are very excited and they're not threatened. But it also, in a very good way, will help people like students, nonprofits, smaller charities, things like that who don't have a large lobby budget or even a policy person on the team, but who is interested in these areas, just get information and allow them to have more access. I definitely think there's just going to be more one-on-one communication. It's not a business that's going out of business anytime soon. There's going to just be, I think, more involvement and more interest from people at different levels. For instance, we have just started conversations with different universities and students, professors, about how they can use AI to stay topical. Having all meetings transcribed, available for them, updating them on topics that are important. It helps professors stay topical, and it also helps students, know what's actually going on instead of seeing just headline issues from DC. I think in Texas, we're always a couple days behind what's really being filed, and it's these great investigative journalists doing work to research what's happening. But what if we could allow students to be their own investigative journalists? And I think that's just that's a great thing. But overall, this industry is not dying anytime soon. And I don't think it's a threat to lobby at all.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, we know what is AI? It's cheap information, right? And if you can give smaller advocacy groups that got all the passion, but a little bit less of the funding, then it can give them access to the information that they wouldn't have otherwise, right? You can have large lobby groups that we love working with. We work with them very, very well. But before we came along, really, in order to find certain information in committee hearings, in order to aggregate and summarize bills, they need to have an army, right? And how do you compete with an army? That's the numbers win a lot of the time, right? But with us, we can kind of be that background there. So we're thrilled to be working with some of the smaller players as well as some of the bigger players as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you were partnering with universities, some other entities sort of that ilk. We always look at public-private partnerships as one of those areas where you tend to want to explore that stuff. They're good for transparency, tend to operate in the open. And then it seems like a public-private partnership with a tool like what you're developing, that starts to really actually level the playing field because you have the ability to massively magnify the impacts of a single individual's efforts. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, public-private partnership is a way to do it, but have you seen experience with other sort of similar strategies that have paid off?
Yeah, some of our largest opportunities right now are with government agencies, right? I mean, the systems that these governments use internally, I have full respect for those who develop them, and I know that it's what's available to it, but when it comes to kind of, you're right, the background and resources that we have on usability, user friendliness, how to make something that actually is as friendly and useful as possible for anyone interacting with the software, it definitely goes a very, very long way. We don't have the okay to specifically talk about the agencies that we're partnered with here, but what we can say is we're working with several agencies as well as the state government itself, like inside of the building in many respects, as well as we're toying with the idea of certain partnerships with universities, because we really believe that if we're able to train the next generation of current students and as they're going into the legislature, if we get them to professors specifically to not fight against AI and actually work with AI to make information more available to those students, we think that one that provide a massive public benefit, and that's something that would help everyone all around. But also we get the next generation on our software as well. So a little bit of selfishness there, but also genuinely believe that if we can help make the government more efficient in any respect, it's a win-win-win, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my mind immediately jumps to like the legislative affairs offices for the federal agencies that we support. They are still in that little small army of people who have to follow a whole bunch of information sources. I'm not trying to go after any of their jobs, but I would say that a well-trained person with a tool like yours could massively amplify that focus. They could spend a little bit more time critically thinking about how to apply the changes in legislation and be more of an advocate and less time just hunting down the information in the first place.
Absolutely. What we internally say is less information gathering and more influencing, right? Influencing is never something artificial intelligence is, if we get humanoid robots, maybe, but I think it's unlikely for the near future, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So want to pivot here just a little bit, with AI having this force magnifying power to really hopefully make more fruitful interactions between lobbyists and lawmakers. I guess, Mike, there's a concern that we hear from time to time around increases in automation resulting in loss of accountability in relationships. How do you think that the accountability of the relationship can survive the introduction of a tool like this and maybe even strengthen those relationships instead of the other way around?
Yeah, I definitely think this is going to help strengthen just from sheer number of information. I think our partners using this in session, this session starting in Texas will start in January. So this will be the first one happening. And I think speed to which they get that information is going to be the most beneficial and probably strengthen relationships. They're going to be able to spend more time in the building and talking to people, talking to staff, ask maybe if there is an unintended consequence, why that is. I think it's just going to increase that person to person interaction in a really good way, and just from the sheer number of information and things they can access quicker.
And there's two types of, people we interact with in the building, right? There's the, engineers, or as we lovingly call them, our policy nerds, and we love them so much. We do love them and we work very, very well with them. And then also there's the, I don't want to call them salespeople, but really the people who have conversations and really move towards that respect, right? And what we can do with this is, if we give the policy nerds or engineers, if you will, all of the information they need very, very quickly, then they can do so much more and then prepare the salespeople, if you will, to really hit the ground running and have all the ammo that they need to run.
Right, right. Obviously, USLege provides a really nice opportunity to collaborate and integrate all of those functions sort of into a single unit. But outside of, a business setting, how else would you potentially see those relationships operating? I'm thinking of this from the perspective of, the AI and the data sets used to train that. You have to be kind of careful about what some of that stuff is, making sure that, bias and all that sort of stuff stays out. You have a nice position to be able to really train a data set, have tight control over it. If that was opened up to a broader market, maybe not quite the same level of control that you're able to enjoy. So, how do you think that people should be viewing that and sort of doing what they can to keep bias and those things out of the tool?
Something Eric brought up earlier, which was really customization at scale. And that's how we really do keep a lot of the bias out of how we train our model, right? We make sure that the model understands what is a bill, what's struck through, what's underlined. So the AI understands that, but it also has to understand what are your priorities. And so our system won't really produce anything for you unless you give it context. And so that is where, say an organization supporting puppies is able to say what they support, and then the AI has context into why. So essentially customized analysis in a way. So it's in a way almost your own bias. You choose what that is, you choose your slant on an issue, and then that's what the AI is going to help you achieve versus having any kind of immediate bias. Like you're able to train your own AI assistant essentially.
That's really interesting. So you can fact check me on this or not. I sort of view bias as like this spectrum, and depending on like really extreme positions, those occupy the outer edges. But what I just heard you say is that based on the way your tool operates, you can just collapse the distance between the points a little bit and customize it to your own liking. It's not so much that there is bias as it is every policy position is going to have a little bias associated with it. So be clear about what it is and then use it to your advantage. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. And we have people of all walks of life. We have nonprofits, lobbyists, PACs, associations, think tanks, members, staff, state agencies. They all have different interests and areas. So what's important to someone isn't important to another. So I think that that is, yeah, fair to say this is not a one size fits all. You train your own on what is relevant for you.
That's a really unique perspective and approach. Very cool.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most key components to what we do because, probably one of the hottest topics right now in Texas specifically is school choice, right? So, and we have partners on both sides of school choice. And if we don't let them have their bias in the content that they add in, that's going to be a huge issue, right? So that safeguard around these individualized GPTs that we create for them is really one of the key components.
Yeah. What I like about it is that it just reflects reality. The bigger your data set is, the less reasonable a request of, I need you to cleanse all bias out of this data set. We do a lot of work with law enforcement. Well, sure, go ahead and try to cleanse 50 years of law enforcement data of bias, but like it's just there. It's inherently there. This is a neat approach because it's acknowledging that you're going to find it, but then putting guardrails in to like, you don't want to spin wildly out of control, but like you're also advocating for a position, which means that you're not neutral. And so that's a very clever way to deal with that issue. Just sort of instead of making unrealistic promises about like, oh, well, we'll try to cleanse these data sets and make sure that it's not there. And most of the time that just doesn't work. Here instead, it's, listen, we're going to identify it transparently, point it out for you. And then within reason, you can then figure out how to use that to advocate for your policy position. It's very, very cool. It's very cool.
You can also figure out the other side's opinion on it a little easier. I think some people working in the building's given me just opened my eyes to seeing both sides so much more clearly because I was able to see in committee hearings, wow, that person made a lot of sense. So did this person. I think sometimes people say, well, how could anyone think this? I mean, that's some kind of question you could start asking it to kind of brainstorm. And I think that's a very positive outcome. Some of our state agencies, for instance, are neutral on bills. So, we train it on that information as well. So it would be like, we are neutral on this, but we're representing this organization, this state agency for the state of Texas. Would still have then the AI has the context to understand to give a better outcome.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that. Other common solutions you see to that are trying to like maintain the human in the loop. But your system requires the human in the loop. You're providing the human the information that they need. And so if it generated something really wackadoo, there's no way this could possibly be true. That sort of stuff flags pretty easily, but then also gives you the sort of guardrails of like, here's what it says, but think about it. Give it a thought or two before you want to start occupying that ground. Like, is that really the hill you want to die on? Just give it a think, just to see what happens. That's great stuff.
And with legislative offices, right, we're going to be able to pull in more and more data from the past and voter history and find out who your potential allies could be on bills and things like that. So people in the building could train the model on everything their boss views and all of their legislative priorities. And then, because I know a lot of staffers find this tricky. Max, I don't know if you were in the Hill at all, as well as me, but staff will be like, okay, I know I have my view, but my boss has a different view. And you really have to try and see it in their eyes. I think this is a really good way of seeing the legislation in the eyes of your boss who you're representing at all times. So that's another.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective. I'm a lawyer by training. I now call myself a lawyer in recovery because I don't practice anymore. But going through law school, it's exactly what you were saying. You have a position that you're supposed to advocate for, but if you can't advocate for the other side's position just as well, you're probably going to lose because you can't possibly anticipate what they're going to be coming at you with. And so whether it's your own personal heartfelt belief or not, You just have to be aware of how the other side is thinking and the sort of arguments they're going to use. So I think there's a lot of credence to what you just said for sure. I'd like to switch gears here as we're starting to come up on our time a little bit. So as we are all very aware, the US presidential elections are drawing near in this year. I'd love to talk about the challenges that you hear a lot in this sort of environment around election security and misinformation. What sort of positive effects towards combating those trends would a system like what you bring forward to help?
Well, all the data we have is publicly available data, right? We're just giving people access to it. So I think when it comes to our election side that we're developing out, we're very focused on the legislative side right now with our upcoming session. But the potential for the election data is pretty big, right? You've got campaign finance information, you've got, donor histories, and matching that up with the legislative information is just overwhelmingly going to provide more transparency for all. So coming up on this election, I think this time of technology is going to be great for making your vote, seeing what they supported, seeing who donated to them, and seeing what they're really about. I think that's going to really help with anybody seeing transparency and who they're looking to support.
Long term, is this a tool that has information that you would want to try to put into the public hands as much as possible? I mean, that's an ambitious goal for sure.
I think the direction that we would most likely go is, we are a news organization. We do news, and you can imagine, right? Content comes in, we're able to cross-reference that with an AI model that then outputs information. We could use that for articles. We can use that for all sorts of things, right? But we also have tremendous respect and appreciation for journalism as well. I mean, we do it ourselves, but one of our probably largest opportunities and the ones that we want to work with most are, newspapers, news outlets, right? I mean, they're able to just access information so much quicker with us, and it could come up with some of the actual outcomes that they wouldn't have been able to come up with as quickly themselves, right? So it's definitely a direction that we're really leaning towards. And right now we have a couple partnerships currently right now where they're like, what was I doing? What was I doing before, right?
Right. That's incredible. It's a topic that comes up a lot. Our federal government agencies, they obviously are executive branch. And so they take their marching orders from whichever administration is in place, but they are constantly having to fight against how do we have an informed electorate? How do they have faith that the information is there? And it's nice to hear some really tangible, solid ideas that are targeting that trend and trying to do something about it. Because man, some of the other ideas that you hear doesn't fill me full of hope, let's have a self-policing social media platform. Okay, we'll see how that goes, and this at least is providing more transparency, better information, aggregating it at scale in a way that a human being just is not. We just can't deal with that volume of info. So that's very, very encouraging. And I think it's great that you're working in that space. As a means of wrapping up here, I always like to ask our guests this same question, and that is that a lot of our listeners have policy roles. They are advocates. They are lawmakers in some way, shape, or form. And so given the experience that you've each generated with AI and government policy and political advocacy, what sort of key policy or pieces of advice would you want to be able to convey to those folks, knowing that in the future, they're going to be seeing issues like this with greater regularity?
I would say, I think it's important to start using, if the private sector are using it, the government should be as well, and using it to their advantage. There's too much data. And like you mentioned, putting it all into one place. This is all stuff that's out there that's taken hours and hours of time. If there's a simpler, quicker way to do it and create things and, predict outcomes of things that were never possible before with this data, I think the government and private sector should harness it. And so definitely working with AI, there's definitely, deep fakes and all these other things people are concerned about, but there's so many amazing use cases that I think people should really lean into it and see what's possible.
That's great. That's great. Eric, how about you?
Yeah, I think in a similar vein, there's just like how you mentioned, if you can't argue the other side, then you're probably going to lose that case, right? We definitely believe that, there's on one side, you can say, hey, this is not something that we're going to go into. We're going to ban it all over the place. Or you can really embrace it and then actually understand it. And I'll give another shout out to the IT caucus in Texas. They do a really great job and they're kind of a conduit for the rest of the Texas government to really understand and give recommendations for that type of thing. And they really are thinking about it in the right way. I also can tell you that I actually cannot tell you how many conversations we have that have started out with people nearly cursing at us because they're like, oh, I can't wait to see how your other customers use AI because they're going to be awful next session, right? And then by the end of it, they're a partner and they're a believer. It happens all the time. We get a lot of doubters, but once they actually can touch it, feel it, and see, okay, this would literally save me 5 hours a day if I was able to use this technology effectively, then they really lean in and become partners of ours much, much faster than you'd expect.
Yeah. That's a really interesting trend for sure. It's a common final word of wisdom of like, just go play with it. Don't be afraid of these things. Like, download a free version and just start messing around with it to see what it can do. I agree with you. That is the best starting point, and hopefully that sparks enough interest. And when you see the power of what these tools can do, I don't think that there's really going to be much of a hope of slowing this down. Like, we are all on this train now. So, what you can do is have something to say about what the destination looks like, but there's no applying the brakes at this point. It does not seem like that is going to happen.
Yes, people get less scared when they see it in real life too. They've just never used it, but it's exciting to see. People are very welcoming. I mean, 99% of people are big supporters.
And I think we're the genre where people are most scared about, and I'll just end with one story. We have a partner of ours. His name is Andy Cates. He's our general counsel, Texas ethics lawyer extraordinaire. He's an awesome partner of ours. And he went to a committee hearing about AI, right? And he actually made a deep fake of one of the legislators while he was sitting there giving his testimony. And the eyes of everybody there just went way, way wide and oh no, I don't want that to happen to me. So of course, it's very, very obvious. And they should be a little bit hesitant of technology like deep fakes. And of course, AI is the opportunity to really spread some, weird stuff, right? It's not quite the space that we're in. We're more the digesting of massive amounts of information and giving inferences on what somebody would really care about, right? We're not trying to create any deep fakes of anyone over here.
Yeah. But, illustrates the power of what these things are. And do you want to be in that committee panel with your eyes aghast going, I had no idea? Or do you want to be the one going, this is what I was talking about. This is the future that we need to be aware of, and that this is what our jobs are going to entail. We are going to have to weigh in on this eventually.
Absolutely. 100%. Love it.
All right. Well, great story and profound words. I want to thank you both for all of your insights and wisdom today. And to the rest of our listeners out there, we'll see you next time.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.